Hi everyone. Yeah, as Dan says, I'm Mel Fletcher from Natural England. I'm a standing water specialist, and I'm here to talk to you today. Coming up? Sorry, I can see my slides, but oh yeah, there they are. About a citizen science project that we're developing with the Freshwater Biological Association. Um, One thing I noticed with this slide is it looks a bit ominous, but actually this talk is about action and invertebrates, so hopefully a bit more hopeful than that initial slide looks. I think we've seen today and yesterday also, sorry, that there's a lot of issues with freshwater. Obviously, we've talked a lot today and yesterday as well about water quality. It's a big thing that's happening everywhere for all our lakes. But also we need to think about all the other pressures that apply to lakes. We've got abstraction and inflow, so it's that water balance. Where's the water coming from? Where's it going to? We also need to think about the shorelines and how impacted they can be in terms of loss of natural vegetation and the importance that that brings with it and the lack of benefits when you lose all that. And thinking about, I think people have talked about biosecurity today, so thinking about invasive non-native species and how impactful they can be in terms of kind of simplifying the plants and animals that already live there. And the other thing, I think, and it sort of came out yesterday and has come out today, is that I think when we think about lakes, there's often such massive kind of ecosystems that we think about, and people are scared about the complexity and the difficulty of tackling the issues. But I think the other thing that came out, people have been talking a lot about hope today, and I think it's that thinking that we can't just think it's too difficult, it's too expensive, we need to actually tackle it. And I think what this does, and these kind of projects actually, and lakes are the perfect place to bring collective action into play. And we all need to look at it, from people on the ground to policymakers. And that's come up on the Slido and comments that people have made, which is we need to get it right through from on the ground to actually government action to say we need to tackle issues in lakes. And the other thing is not to think that it's too difficult. We can start with simple steps and move on to things like water quality, obviously a catchment scale, big thing that we have to address. But we can do that if you start with some smaller actions, and while they're happening and getting benefits, then the water quality issues can be tackled as well. So it's just thinking about it in those kind of ways that we can do something. Again, how can we help? Obviously yesterday especially, and today, we've been talking a lot about how we can engage people with lakes. Clearly there's massive engagement here, and that's brilliant, and in other places. We know that data collection is important. We need to know what the pressures are and where they are as well. It's obviously really important. So all different types of data collection can feed into that. But we need to link the pressures to solutions. We've talked again about that today, which is very much about how do we actually do something to make things different. And of course with lakes, as we've said, we're talking about big systems, lots of issues. So we need to have sustained and join up action to make things change. And we also have to be mindful that this is going to take a long time, and that's okay. It's going to take a while to change. And also that, lakes can often have a lag time until you see response. And that's okay as well. But we can also see some things happening before we get to the bigger picture, whole scale change. And that's what we need to be looking at, those small scale kind of interventions and things that can help us get to where we need to be at the end. So in terms of what is Lakefly monitoring, it's a work in progress. I've said working on with the Freshwater Biological Association. We heard about Riverfly earlier, and this is sort of based on the Riverfly system, which has obviously been successfully running for about 20 years. It follows a similar sampling method, so the kick sample method, so really easy to apply and go out and do. We're using freshwater inverts as indicators. We've got a few more groups that we look at in Lakefly, right through from things that we saw earlier, like the mayflies and the stoneflies and the caddis, right through to some of the leeches and the snails and things like that. We're also developing a simple scoring system to actually kind of link what we're seeing with the invertebrates directly to water quality, and that's in progress at the moment. And again, we're thinking a lot when we talk about citizen science about what we're going to do with that data. We need to have something useful and meaningful that people are collecting. So it's obviously that engagement and interest in getting people down to their waterways, but also thinking about we need long-term data. We talk a lot about climate change. There's very little support and sustained support for collection of long-term data, so it often has to be done through volunteer effort. But that means that we then get those really important long-term data sets, and local data is so important. One of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute is that obviously lakes are quite complex systems with very kind of complex shorelines, and we need to make sure that we're getting data at all the different points where we need it. And then we need to feed that through into restoration action and actually see something happening for what we're doing. This is just a few kind of slightly random things that I put together when we're thinking about lakes. One thing about this meeting is we're here to talk about lakes, but often rivers seem to be the thing that's in people's psyche when they think about freshwaters. So just to put a kind of bit of a case across for lakes, we're obviously talking to the right audience here. And just to think about, when we think about lakes, I've sort of used the term crinkliness of the lakes. I think this is one of my colleagues uses this term. And it's that, you know, they're really complex shorelines and things. That's what makes them interesting, but it also means that you have to think about that when you're monitoring them. We need to have that attention to those specific places, both in terms of the data that we collect, but also what we can do in those places and what's needed for action in those places. We're obviously talking about water quality and the interest in that and what we can help to do to fix those problems. But we also need to think about the connection between water and land. Invertebrates often have a phase where they live in water and then they have a flying adult phase for distribution, and that's where they can tell us a big story about that connectivity between water and land and the kind of restoration we need to put in place both in the lake and in those riparian habitats and kind of lakeside habitats. And also shoreline restoration is something that we can put in place which can be done relatively simply, effectively and quickly with quick results whilst we're tackling some of those bigger issues like water quality that might take a bit longer to do. Next steps, we're doing some Lakefly pilots at the moment. If you're interested, please do get in touch. But also just to say that you can add on other participatory science examples. So somebody else mentioned earlier that Linda's project about blooming algae, and we've got priority habitats and naturalness surveys that you can do, can be done quickly while you're at site and added onto the Lakefly. Thank you very much. We haven't got time for questions.